Cool. Grace, could you tell us where you first heard about the Women's Encampment for Future Peace and Justice?
That's a really good question, and that's a really bad answer. Let's see. So I came in September of 1983, the first time, and I had friends who were helping to organize the big opening action on July 4th weekend, right? It was July 4th. So, and those were folks through Movement for New Society, and I heard about it through them. I don't remember more details than that, really.
So, when was the first time that you went to the peace camp?
It was September of 1983. Is that right?
Wait.
What was the big opening? See, I do this in my head.
That would have been 83. July of 83.
Okay, so I was there in September of 83.
Not for the opening.
I missed the opening, although I have great stories to tell from other people's tales.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, no, I was there for Labor Day weekend, which was also a big action, but not as big.
And had you been part of the women's community before?
Yeah, I had hooked up with the Women's Pentagon Action folks. And this is where I'm beginning to get a little blurry in my head. We may have to like reconstruct all of this, but anyway. So, I mean, Movement for New Society had a very strong feminist subgroup to it. And then there was also Women's Pentagon Action folks, and I can't remember. I don't know. This really would take some serious reconstructing.
When was Women's
83.
Pentagon Action?
But I wasn't at the first two Women's Pentagon Actions. I was at the one at the Stock Exchange in New York.
Uh-huh.
What year was that? Was that 84?
Might have been. I don't really know because I wasn't part of those actions.
I do know. I mean, I helped organize it. I could reconstruct given some time, but
okay.
I haven't.
And then, all right, so if you were there in the fall of 83, did you participate in?
Yeah, in the Labor Day actions that happened.
Okay. So,
and it was a big deal for me. I mean, the whole peace camp was a big deal for me, not because of the women's element so much as because of nuclear weapons. I'm one of those folks who grew up terrified of the end of the world because of nuclear annihilation. And so the whole experience of deciding to go, I think part of the reason I didn't go earlier that summer was because I was scared to be on land that was that close to actual nuclear missiles. And so there was a whole thing for me of going to the land and sort of trying to figure out how to like not just be scared the whole time of being that close to nuclear missiles.
And where were you living at the time that you were?
Here in Cambridge or Somerville.
Uh-huh. Okay. And so you did go to the land. What finally propelled you to get there? Well,
listening to everybody's amazing stories about the actions over the summer, and I just felt like wanting to be there with women. I had worked, on nuclear weapons issues as an activist here in the Cambridge area and in the Boston area. We had done this whole campaign to outlaw nuclear weapons in Cambridge called the Nuclear Free Cambridge campaign. And in fact, maybe it was where they happened at around the same time. We were working to outlaw the anything design or construction of nuclear weapons, which in Cambridge with Draper Labs was not the most popular thing with the business community. And I had from when I was in sixth grade been afraid of nuclear power and nuclear weapons and nuclear annihilation. And so,
was there something specific that precipitated that in sixth grade?
I don't think it's an unusual. There's an age group of us who seem to have grown up with that fear, and it was very hard because our parents didn't, I don't think, recognize that we were scared, and for sure didn't have the emotional coaching, counseling tools, whatever, to handle it. I don't know. I think it was connected to having grown up being just old enough to understand that what war meant when the Vietnam War was going on, but by the time I was old enough to really sort of think more politically, it was over. So I only had the experience of, as a young, teenager, of being scared by it, but not having any tools to understand the bigger picture. And so I think that very much connected to being afraid of nuclear annihilation, whether it was through nuclear power or accident or nuclear weapons. And I found out quite a number of years later that my mother had been afraid of, because she had been of the age when the first, for the air raids and the, duck and cover stuff, and the first sort of fear about when the atom bomb was used and stuff like that. So I actually think I may have picked up as a kid a fear that she was carrying, that she had sort of submerged or whatever. But I remember learning about nuclear power and figuring out that the Shoreham nuclear power plant was like way too close to where I grew up in New York City. Like, that was like not a good thing. I figured out we were in the kill zone or something if there was a major accident. So yeah, so it was a big deal for me to go. I remember, being on the land and going and putting my tent out in what would have been Amazon acres, I suppose, and just sort of standing there and thinking, over there are, like, within reaching distance sort of, are nuclear weapons. It's the closest I had consciously, been aware of being. What brought me to that? You asked me some other question that got me there, but anyway.
Yeah. All right, so you overcame because other people were so excited about what was going on at the camp.
Right. And I also think I knew I needed to face my fear. Like, it made sense to go be there physically, not just work against nuclear weapons and nuclear power here, but to actually sort of confront my fear.
And what was your first impression when you got to the camp?
I wonder now. I have images in my head, but I wonder now whether most of it was my own internal conversation about being that close, and what did I feel about it, and sort of like trying to, put my feet on the land and be okay. I'm on land. I can breathe. Nothing's changed. Here I am. I'm okay. I think that maybe that's why, I have images of going into the healing room, and I'm sure I met Twy and wearing whatever amazing gauzy thing she was wearing at the time, and I remember the fire pits. I remember women cooking, and in this unbelievably hot weather with nothing on, and whatever, these huge amounts of food. But yeah, I don't know. I think
But what about the action?
Well, the action was fun, because I had been trained as a trainer around civil disobedience and stuff like that, and had a fair amount of information about what to do and stuff. And I ended up getting tapped, and I don't know why it happened, to be the support person for the multiple offenders group. So one of the two affinity groups of women who had been arrested more than once, for whom, it would be, if they got arrested, might have much higher charges attached to it, but who wanted to do the action anyway. And they also felt like if they were going to do the civil disobedience action, they really wanted it not to just be, sort of an anonymous going over the fence or whatever. They felt like they really wanted to do something with a message and a meaning, and that had more of a political analysis to it somehow. I'm not quite coming up with the right words, but so I sat with them while they struggled through trying to find something that could be more, had some visuals attached to it, would have a message that was more specific and also visual, so that given that you never know how fast they're going to arrest you. They wanted something that would sort of stand on its own. And they ended up talking about the economic connection of the impact on lives and the loss of not just life because of nuclear weapons, but that it cut into our ability to have jobs and homes and safe communities and schools and all that sort of stuff. And so I ended up teaching them the Diggers song, and that ended up being the name of the affinity group. You know the Diggers song? The story of the Diggers.
Do you remember it?
It's a fairly famous folk song about the Diggers movement in England around when the government of England in the Middle Ages was taking away the commons because there was common land for everybody's animals to graze on and whatever. And it was a key way that regular people lived, because they might work for the Lord tilling his soil or whatever, but they had their own little garden and they had a cow or something. And the British government during industrialization basically took away those lands, and so people were displaced or couldn't get food that was a normal part of subsistence, and out of that came a movement, and they called themselves the Diggers, and they would basically go in and, like, you know, take down walls around the common areas that had been walled in by the government or whatever. So I guess, I don't know, it may come to me. It's not quite, I can get edges of the song in my head, but it's not quite.
And was it a very large affinity group?
You know, in my stuff that may have gotten ruined in the most recent flood in storage, but if not, I think I actually have the sign-in sheet from the
was
women
it like 5 people or 15?
I want to say
20?
10 or 12.
Okay.
Women, yeah.
Okay, so they...
Including 2 of the women who were underage, who had done civil disobedience. 2 of the women who were younger than 18, you know, for whom the laws are different. So.
All right, and so where did they do this action?
We were pretty much at the front gate. We all walked, I mean, it was a pretty big action, the Labor Day action. There were a lot of women walked down to the front gate. There were women who had decided to do a death dance in front of the gate, and so that happened first. And actually the woman who was my friend who had driven out with me, was one of the leaders of that dance, and had this amazingly gauzy, rainbowy thing on. I remember, in fact, I must have a picture of her like this, you know, with her rainbowy thing flowing everywhere. But and then as soon as that was done was when folks started going over the fence or whatever. But we had agreed to dig under the fence. My folks were digging as diggers under the fence, and they had brought different like plastic toys representing housing and schools and, I don't remember, farms and food and whatever. So they went under, but they also placed in front of the gate all these little plastic toys, and they had a statement. That may have even been the one who read the statement while they were going under the fence.
Wow, that's a pretty good description, actually. There may be pictures of that.
I think there are pictures of that.
All right, and so then did you stay for a period of time?
Long weekend, really. That was it. And I came back the next summer at some point. But then, you know, I mean, I had an interesting relationship with the peace camp, because it was somewhat my personal relationship, but often it was through other women. You know, like they had originally heard about it because of the women who I knew who were organizing, you know, the buying of the land to some extent, and then trying to, some of my folks were among the segment of women who were trying to build a relationship with the townsfolks and sort of trying to do the community outreach piece, and some of them were facilitators, you know. So there was all these roles, and that happened over the years before I got re-involved and ended up on the Women's Peace Land Board. you know, I could do sort of a who's who, but it was funny. I seemed to always have a connection with somebody who was in the core group as the years went by.
Oh, interesting. So you eventually became quite active at the Peace Camp?
Yeah, when it was turned into the Peace Land, again through somebody. My partner at the time, she had been active, I guess, for a year, you might remember, years earlier, but when we got together was just after the transition had happened, the transform or die transition. And so, you know, we went out to the land one weekend and it was like, oh, you want to be on the board? Be on the executive collective? Oh, okay. But we had fun because I think that was the weekend that we led the training in was it that weekend? I think so. That I was asked to come out and do the training on classism. And we did, I don't know, 3-hour workshop on that. So.
Okay, so then can you talk about the next years of involvement?
The phase.
So hold on a sec, was there anything between September of '83 and Peace?
Yeah, I was there in the summer of '84.
So maybe just a little minute.
But I don't know that I remember much about it.
Was it, again, just a long weekend, or was it?
No, I was there for longer than that, maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks. But, you know, I think for me, I was often there in sort of always more of a receptive mode. Like, I don't have a real sense of, like, going and taking leadership on something.
Did you do any civil disobedience training?
No.
Sessions?
I didn't. I could have, but I didn't.
Uh-huh.
Again, I mean, it was sort of, you know, I maybe because I was on the younger end of the age group of folks when I was there, the women that I knew were mostly, you know, at least some amount older than me, and so, you know, they would have been the ones training, even though I had been trained by some of them in, you know, and would do trainings around the Boston area or something. I didn't ever seem to go there as, I always felt like I was more of just being available, whatever folks wanted me to do, and I didn't end up doing a lot of that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't have any clear sense. I have more of this feeling of sort of wandering from thing to thing and just sort of enjoying it, or being available for, you know, an extra set of hands for, oh, we need to go dig up this pipe, or oh, we need to, you know, tear down this part of the walkway because it's rotting, or whatever was needed.
Did you participate in any spirituality stuff at that time?
I'm sure I did. Don't have a clear recollection about that either, particularly. You know, I mean, the first summer I was there, it was just, part of it was just enjoying this sort of overwhelming number of women, just being and doing whatever, and just receiving whatever that was.
So, Grace, were you out at that time?
I was, that's a good question. Let's see. I was definitely out as bisexual at that time. When did I come out as a lesbian? Must have been later. Probably 85, would be my guess.
Okay. And then it's probably like 89 or 90.
I was going to say that, yeah, I was going to say 91. Because when did Transform or Die happen?
Well,
wasn't it in 90?
90?
Yeah. So this was right after that. And so I ended up on the executive collective, and, you know, I loved the conversation about land trusting and thinking about how to create a long-term living community. We certainly had our struggles with trying to figure out how we could save various structures, or whether we should pull them down, or whether we should rebuild, or how much everything would cost. I thought, you know, but we also did a lot of sharing that I thought really amazing things, whether it was skills or perspective, or, you know, struggling through different issues, which I think in some ways it was a sort of a treat, I think, to still struggle with some of the same issues, but because it was a smaller group and our vision was our time frame was longer, that I think, although we struggled through things, I think we had more time to listen to each other, or at least the potential to really listen and hear through and struggle through things that I really appreciated. You know, so there was the whole issue about, you know, this woman, transsexual, and what did we want to do with her that we all struggled through at one point. And there was issues about structure and really figuring out how to, over time, have respectful relationships where it wasn't a few women telling everybody else what to do. And sort of, you know, I mean, I sort of came into the predefined, you know, clipboard lady versus, what was the other? Grunts. And it was sort of like, it was interesting because, I mean, I think that there was an attempt to say that those were just different styles, but they're definitely, one style is definitely valued more in our larger culture than the other one. And I think we were still struggling with that. And I mean, it's fine to say that it's sort of not supposed to be better than, but I think we were still struggling with not having one be seen as better than the other.
One of the things that had changed was that, didn't we start using a computer in our meetings?
Yep, right. I and Mary came with laptops, always traveled with laptops.
Right, and that made a big difference in how our meetings went, because, talk about that, how we then always had.
Because we could take notes right away and be able to hand out at the end of the meeting. One of the things we would do is to go through the notes and grab everybody's to-do list and turn it into a one-pager that we could print off and give to everybody, so that everybody had what they were supposed to get, you know, had committed to doing. That's one of those places where I think it was sort of a gift to have the technology available to do something that actually, I think, broke down that distinction between sort of the clipboard ladies, the folks who like take notes and know what they're supposed to do and get it done, you know, versus the folks who that's not the way they keep track of things. So I think probably that actually broke down some of the division between those styles. And, you know, hanging out at the nearby fire pit and the meditation circle, I think we had more time to do sharing in certain ways and really try and build a group sense out of our differences. And related to that, the meditation circle, doing healing rituals and stuff. I got to do a Reiki training with everybody. That was fun.
Tell us a little bit, what was your understanding of when you came into it after the Transform and Die, what the structure of the Peace Land was at that point in terms of how decisions were made, how?
Well, I mean, I think that we really were certainly not a traditional nonprofit, but we and there were women who struggled with this, of sort of like being more explicit about structure, being more explicit about legal responsibilities and what to do with that. Because, for instance, there weren't a lot of women on the land all the time, and so things like, you know, so if a woman comes and visits, what happens about her impact on the land, on the women who are living there, or on the structures on the land or whatever, and that there was some more sense that we had to build a longer term accountability with each other. And I think that there were women who didn't like that, who wanted it still to be sort of come and go as you want, leave your stuff there for 6 months if you're going away, and, you know, come back and expect it still to be sitting there. And for the women who were living on the land, that wasn't okay. You know, they needed to have the ability to use a space, not just ignore somebody's stuff there for 6 months or whatever. And so I felt like we had to negotiate those relationships more. But I don't know, I noticed this about myself more as I understand myself in the world, that I appreciate those agreements. Like, to me, agreements aren't a binding thing in a negative way. It's like, to me, that's how I like to relate to other people, is to know what our agreements are and to be explicit about them and to work out the differences. And I think that there was, for some of the women who felt like one of the things they liked about the peace camp was that it was more of a free-for-all. And that, you know, that they felt like they could freely come and go and not have much of a sense of obligation. I think the Peace Land was hard for them, because we were much more explicit about saying we do have obligations to the land, to each other, to future use of the land, whatever those things were. So maybe it has to do with your style a little bit.
how were decisions made about who could be a part of Peaceland? And when you said
Well, so we set up a structure and we created a legal entity, and which had requirements, and anybody could volunteer and be active, come by whenever you wanted to help out with whatever was needed. But in terms of the decision making, because it's a corporation and because it had a structure, we needed to define who was part of what we ended up calling the executive collective, and who was transitioning on, and who just wanted to not have to have that level of relationship. So we had 3 levels, and I don't remember what they were called, but if somebody wanted to join the executive collective, we struggled a lot with, does that just mean you walk into a meeting and it's okay for you to just participate? And we decided no, because we were also taking responsibility for keeping the buildings going and trying to make sure that the women who lived on the land had enough to get by and at least have, pay the water bill and all of those kinds of things. And I think that, I'm not sure why this happened completely, but when we went around the room sort of after it had been a couple of years, what we realized was that the women who had stayed connected, and there were a few exceptions to this, but almost all of them were folks who were relatively low income. So we had, I think, more of an economic interdependence on each other than another group of women might have had. And there was a sense, and again, I don't know what other people's sense was, but I felt like part of what was going on there was that the women who felt like the land was both a necessity and an obligation were women who didn't have as much economic privilege. Women who felt like this is really valuable because I'm not going to ever necessarily have access to a piece of land like this unless this continues to exist on the one hand, and on the other hand therefore felt like it was a real responsibility to try and keep things going. And I think that for some of the women who'd had a longer relationship, who'd sort of come through the peace camp phase and had more economic privilege, would kind of come by and be like, well, why aren't you doing more about this, and why haven't you repaired that, and why does the place look like such and such? And we were always like, hey, give us some money, come put some time and energy in, and it'll look even better than it does, But it was an interesting disconnect. I tend to play this bridge role anyway, but I grew up with a fair amount of money, and I don't have it now, and I've lived a fairly working class adult life. But I think the perspective of seeing that difference, and we struggled with why is it, where is this difference? So I think I've named what I think we tried to figure out about it. But it was important, and I think there was a reason why those were the women who kept coming back and staying connected, more than women who I think could say, well, I don't want to deal with the structure. I have and I don't think it was conscious necessarily, but I have the wherewithal to go buy the piece of land I want to have and build the house I want to have and, do something else. Whereas we were kind of, I think in a good way, stuck with each other.
And how many of you were stuck with each other? How many women were involved at that point?
God, it shifted. Well, it's helpful. She's reminding me. It dwindled some over time, although it would go up and down. So, yeah, I think when we started off, it was probably around 13. And then we lost a few women, and then we got a few other women got involved. We did some years where we did a significant amount of outreach, and we get a few more women involved, and then that would last for a while. And then some other women, because our lives changed, would leave. So I think it went up and down. But I don't know that it ever went below 7 or 8. So
towards the very end.
Yeah, it's hard to know how you measure end.
Grace, you mentioned like some of the initial stuff, the land trust stuff. The buildings. There was some real joy in
tending the land. And I can't remember now, maybe 2 years after we had formed the Peaceland, got it working? I think probably 2 years after we had formed the Peaceland, we figured out that the land was renewing itself. you know, I think when the land was first gotten, it was furrows. It was fairly dry. It was pretty brutalized from the kind of farming that had been done, and that now there's a whole movement about the problems with the way we used to farm in that time period in this country. But anyway, and I think that we finally figured out that the land was healing itself, and that the kinds of plants that were growing were different, and the trees were getting healthier and bigger, and you know, that it had sort of rejuvenated itself over time, and that we could feel the difference, and that was amazing. And I think things connected to that. I mean, yes, you know, we didn't have a lot of money, but getting our hands on the tractor and being able to actually mow the lawns, and we had, I used to love coming out in the spring, and we would just sort of like spend a week and a half just whipping things into shape, and we would always take on one project, you know, like, okay, this roof is going to collapse if we don't put this post up, so we've got to figure out how to put this post up. And we would, and I think it changed our relationship to the community. I mean, partly I think the relationship to the community changed because, lo and behold, when the U.S. government started closing Army bases, they closed the one there because we had made them miserable. I think partly they had to choose which ones to close. But it was interesting watching the relationship to the women and men who lived locally, and folks going from seeing the peace land as sort of these freaky pain in the butt women to going, God, you know, we do have health problems because of the nuclear and other problems, toxic problems from the Army base, and oh, there are actually, you know, like things that had been said in a kind of confrontational way. I think once that dissipated, the sense of confrontation dissipated, that there was also more connecting, and it was less us them. And I think that the peace land benefited from that, you know, building on relationships that had been built to actually be like, okay, we don't know how to fix this thing. Who in the town or the town next door does this? And would they let us, you know, would they sit with us and talk to us about how to fix whatever it was? And you know, we still did our occasional protests. We had this fun action we did. We realized that they had this sign in front of the Army Depot, and I'm not going to remember exactly what it said, but something about, you know, what was, yeah, but quality was the word we changed, but what was the whole, was something like
working for quality.
Right, working for quality and peace around the world, or some ridiculous whatever. The working for quality piece.
For quality.
Anyway, we drove.
Do you remember what it was first?
I think we had that picture. I thought it was committed to quality.
Oh, committed to quality. That sounds right. Anyway, we just thought that was ridiculous and that it needed a little bit of help. So some women went down and nonchalantly walked past the sign and sat down on the little ledge in front of it, and then behind their backs measured the height of the letters so that we could properly adapt the statement, and went off and we created a little E. A big E, well, an E the right size, and out of black lettering with the right thickness, and then a day or two later went back over and happened to walk by and happened to sit down and added the E so that it said equality. And of course, as always, you know, the funny thing about the depot was that they just didn't seem to pay any attention to all sorts of things. I mean, I can't remember how long it was before they figured out that it said equality and they should get rid of the E because we had changed their statement. But you know, they just weren't. Amazing how oblivious they could be to their own advertising, and whenever we decided to adjust it for them.
It was probably several weeks.
Yeah, it was weeks. It was weeks. I don't remember how many, but it was weeks. Yeah, and then we had the whole conversation when the depot closed, the Army part of it closed, about not wanting to lose. We wanted to make sure we had a few of those signs, the Army signs that are posted at different distances along the fence. And you know, we knew they were going to pull down the fence, but certainly, you know, for posterity's sake, if nothing else, we wanted to make sure we had a few of those signs. So I won't I guess, discuss on tape how they happened to come into our hands, but that was sort of an interesting experience, and sort of deciding, thinking about things about the, did they still bug our cars or not? What did we think? And that sort of stuff. So that was sort of interesting. So we did some good things, just sort of keep them on notice that we were out there.
Can you talk a little bit about spirituality that went on?
Well, I mean, the land, and I think, the whole issue of healing energy and a different, the power of the circling energy, that I think was part of a lot of women's spirituality on the land from when we were doing more explicit protests. And we carried that on. I mean, I was talking about the meditation circle, but we would do rituals and about different kinds of things. I can't possibly, you have much better stories than I do about magic on the land, but yeah, I mean, I think the piece of keeping it a healing place and stuff, I got fascinated by stone circles in going to the British Isles, and really wanted the land to have a stone circle possibly. We had talked about, and it was funny, it was almost like different of us would have dreams and bring them back to the group, and then we'd go, oh, and I don't mean dreams in the conscious sense of envisioning, although there was that too, but sometimes we would literally have dreams and come back, and we had this whole issue about how many of us had experienced in puberty how negative or not always negative, but something weird about the way when we first got our periods, the reaction of family or adults around that most of us felt like it had altered our sense of our physical strength or our role, sort of creating, there was some way in which adults around us would suddenly create limits. Oh, you're a woman now. Now you're only allowed to do this, or you're only allowed to do that. And so we actually had this whole vision of creating rituals to bring women and help women sort of unlearn stop internalizing the messages that had been attached to this idea that somehow it was supposed to create limits or narrow the definition of who you could be now that you had a period. And we talked about the various ways different of us had experienced that. Even some women who were like, well, my family celebrated it, it still was about being put in a role. And that we thought, if we could help women untangle that it might have an impact on why women stay in battering relationships, or it might have an impact on our sense of our physical being in the world if we could somehow heal whatever those messages were. So that was one of those things that probably the image of the ritual and how we would do it came out of several different women having dreams and coming and saying, well, wait a second, is it connected to this, and is it connected to that? And we never got to the place of having built the circle that we wanted to build, but also that there were other elements to it. I know it wasn't my idea, I think it was your idea, but this whole question of a rage wall, having a place where it was safe to just be really angry, and we struggled. Some women saying, well, if we're going to do that, I need to know when it's being used so I won't be on the land. But a lot of us felt like creating a space where it's okay to be really raging about injustice in the bigger sense, but also in the immediate sense, the ways in which we've felt walled in our lives, and to really be able to do a physical act. And so the concept was to actually have a wall that would be like a cement wall, not a huge thing, but something that was wide enough so that you could actually take glass and safely hurl it against the wall and let it shatter, and ideally then have a space near there where we would have a kiln that we could heat, and you could rage and then take what was left from the rage and turn it into, take the glass in other words, and actually fire the glass and turn it into beauty. So that we recognize that anger in and of itself isn't a bad thing. It comes from reasonable places, and if we can go from the imagery in our society that anger is somehow like the precursor and inherently connected to violence, and understand that actually anger in its most pure sense is simply a demand for justice, and when justice is being denied, and that it doesn't have to be violent at all, but that we need help working through our cultural, I don't even know what I would call it, imposition of values that says anger is always bad because it always leads to violence, and that if we could reclaim our anger and actually turn it into things of beauty, that we might get a real physical and emotional sense that it doesn't have to be that message. And I can't imagine how amazing it would be if most women learned that. That, you know, when we get angry, if we can use it for good, it actually is an incredibly transformative source of energy. So we wanted to do that. We wanted to have like a smaller, not like a stone circle, but a smaller sanctuary space, so that you could kind of prepare yourself if we were going to do a bigger ritual. And we had talked about really pretty amazing uses of the land that would not be like the farming had been, that had sort of taken over all of the wildlife, but instead to do things that would fit into the trees that were growing back and into the lay of the land and how things were happening. We had talked about digging a pond, which actually we got pretty close to getting funding to do, and then of course got yelled at by some woman who was like, "You're going to mess with the water on the land and it's going to change the land and we don't have a right to do that." We're like, the land's already changed. Having a pond would be good for the wildlife, because wildlife in that area has been cut way back in terms of access to water and safe spaces to be in, partly because of the farming and partly because of hunting. And so we felt like, you know, this would be a real gift. It's not just about our acres, it's about the whole ecosystem. And as the fences came down, we started seeing deer and stuff. So I think it really would have had a really wonderful impact.
I want to go back to this. You having gone to the British Isles, and then coming back and wanting the stone circle, and that we actually started to lay in stones to mark that. And talk about that.
Well, we were trying to figure out where on the land. I mean, I think that that was an interesting process. I mean, I don't know what other women's experience of my experience was. I mean, in going to the British Isles, and you know, I think we all have a image in our head of Stonehenge and these huge stones, but there are numerous stone circles in the British Isles, some of which are not huge stones. Some of them are stones that are this high, which is huge, but I mean, you know, not like the monolithic stones of Stonehenge. And what I had found amazing about it was, it's one thing to create a ritual or healing energy in a circle of human beings, sort of by moving or whatever, creating a space. But what was amazing about the stone circles was that the space was already created. It's sort of like, I think it's part of why going to the same church over and over can make it more spiritually powerful. It's partly that the energy gets captured by the stones. It's partly that I think unconsciously we get to identify that space as being, oh, it's a different kind of mental space. And I think unconsciously entering that, if you build that kind of relationship, can have that kind of impact. Well, I was like, wow, you know, it would be amazing to have a physical space to find, like the stones. You know, stone circles, unlike churches, are round and they hold the energy. And it was like, I did some rituals by myself in those contexts, but when you walk the circle and there are stones there, the stones pick it up. They're like, okay, fine, we'll hold this energy, so now you can do your work. And so it seemed like having something on the land like that would be really powerful. And part of the stone circles is that they are oriented towards the different directions and towards the the stones themselves are often positioned in relationship to the seasons and to the solstices and the equinoxes and the position of the sun and even the moon in relationship to where the stones are. So part of building a stone circle was both beginning to build the energy in the physical area of the land, but also beginning to orient. So where would the stones go? I mean, you know, you can take a compass and do east, west, north, and south. But if you're going to really understand where the farthest point is of sunrise at winter solstice, you have to be there at sunrise at winter solstice and mark what direction that is in relationship to the center of a circle. Or if you want to know where sunset, the longest day of the year, is, then you have to be there at sunset on the longest day of the year. So we started doing rituals related to being there at the sunrise and the sunset, or the moonrise, or whatever. And we had, I don't even know where they came from, we had some fairly large quartz stones. You know, we don't know if you'd completely call them crystals in the sense they weren't pure rose quartz or something, but they would have a lot of quartz in them. And we started using those to mark the sites. And we had an amazing time, a couple of times, of going winter solstice when no one was on the land and it was incredibly quiet. And I think it was snowing one of the times we got there. And we would go before sunrise and walk the circle and then chant and create and build some energy. And we had this amazing experience one time of going, and it was cloudy and snowy, and by the time the sun rose, at least where we were, the clouds had parted enough so we could see the sun. And just raising that much energy was an amazing experience. So yeah, so we got partway there.
Yeah, made it hard to lease the land. We could have it on the plan.
Yeah, well, we could have that conversation sometime, but so I don't know what else.
Well, I had a question.
Yeah.
You spoke at the outset about fear of missiles and what you overcame to come to the land. And I'm curious about, actually, when you spent more time in later years at the land, one about the land itself and radiation in the water or such from the base, that kind of toxicity, but also anything that you would know about zapping or some of that other stuff that women have spoken about on the land.
You know, I was certainly, I was there a few times when women felt that there was zapping going on. Mostly, again, I heard more from women I knew there. And I didn't have a sense in later years of the land being particularly poisoned in terms of toxicity. I mean, the problem is, you know, this is a long term. Where will it be 100 years from now? I don't know. You know, these people who say nuclear is clean energy, it's sort of like, yeah, for whom and when? You know, so I don't know, you know, and they some of the buildings, it's not like all the buildings at the depot were changed into housing or whatever. There are areas of the depot where they took those buildings and they cemented up the windows, and so who knows what's in those buildings. And what will get out and when it'll get out. I mean, I think there's a really long-term environmental question that doesn't exist just there about what we've done to the land that we live on, and what that means longer term. I don't know. Maybe if we could create some really good healing energy over a long period of time, we could change that, transform it.
Of course, for some reason, just because I think a lot of our stuff was spiritual,
yeah,
I keep remembering those kinds of things. And I do remember a lot of sitting at the fire after the work was done, and singing songs. Did you have favorite songs at the Peace Camp?
Yeah, I mean, bunches of them. I mean, it was funny because I always liked Swimming to the Other Side, which we used to sing a fair amount in the Peaceland phase of things. I think of that song. I mean, it's a Pat Humphries song. It's I don't know why I'm having problems finding songs today. Let me do the other side. We are living beneath the great big dipper. We are swimming. We are living neath the great big dipper, we are. Na 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 na. I can come up with a tune, but not the words. Na 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 na. We are living neath the great big dipper, we are. Na 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 na. Living in the world together, we're all swimming to the other side. Can't think of. If I take enough time, it'll all the whole thing will come to me. But
Grace, were there times other than about the nuclear power fears?
Yeah.
Were you ever fearful at the camp about any other kinds of things?
I really wasn't. You know, I know I wasn't there when there were when I was never there when any of the incidences where the house was fired on happened. I was there, I think, only once when there was a strange car that pulled up and we weren't sure about. This is one of those places where either I'm crazy or, having grown up in New York City and walked alone at night, I don't carry the same. It's not that I don't think about the fact that, yeah, we could have gotten attacked or it could have been dangerous. It's just I think I was used to living with that sense of handling that sense of unsafety. I wasn't really scared about that stuff. It's just like the zapping thing I don't remember that as affecting me particularly. I've always done a fair amount of healing work also, and so I think that, you know, I always had my homeopathic kit, my flower essences, my whatever, and I think I've tended to monitor my own, you know, or having co-counseling skills or whatever it was to get through things. So I don't, that didn't matter as much. And I think over time I came to terms with my fear around nuclear war stuff too. It isn't that I don't think it would be a really bad idea, and we're back being close to again, which we weren't 10 years ago in the same way. But just finding a resting place with that. There was actually a great book I read once that had a great story in it. But anyway, I won't go into that. But
can you speak to the executive collective now and what's happened with the land in the last year or two?
Not the thing I want to talk about, but I mean, you know, we struggled to keep the land going, and we at times would pull together all the names of women we knew who had been connected with the land, and we would send out a fundraising letter, and we would get something back, not necessarily a lot. But what we had to do every year was to make the property taxes. That was the most critical thing, and none of us had a lot of money to do it. So some years there would be a few women who had more money, who, you know, still had some relationship, but not necessarily an active relationship with the land, who would send us enough money so that plus a few other people putting some money in would be enough to make the property taxes. And we actually correctly knew that as a nonprofit that was using the land not for profit making purposes should be eligible for a tax abatement on the land. And the tax abatement was really what we needed, because the taxes were the most expensive thing. You know, we didn't use a lot of water when we didn't have the money to pay for it, et cetera, but we had to make the taxes. And so we actually tried a couple of times to file for the tax abatement. We finally got our filings done, sent them in, and they basically ruled against us. Now, my guess is that ruling was not legal. And in fact, we talked to a lawyer who said, yeah, that's kind of hinky. Why don't we put in some changes and see if we can get it to move? And they were like, well, yeah, but they had a hearing at a time when neither you nor I could make it. And so they said, well, you'll just have to apply again next year. And we had a regular time that the taxes were always due. And at the time, Estelle had moved here, and so we had changed her address to here. And she, for a couple of years, she got the tax bills, and we would always, you know, usually, if no one else, I would dig out the money out of savings or something to make up the difference, and we would send a money order, you know, the week before they were due, and sort of be whatever. Now, what that meant was we were always behind. You know, we were paying the delinquent taxes that if it didn't get paid the land would be in trouble. So we were always a year or 2 years behind. Mysteriously, one fall, Estelle didn't get the tax bill. And my internal whatever, she called me and said, you know, it's weird, I haven't gotten a tax bill. And I think you even tried to find out what was going on a couple of times, didn't get a call back, whatever. But my internal clock, my inner sense of every year was March 1st. They're due March 1st. And so sometime in the middle of February, I called Estelle and said, what are we doing about paying the taxes? We got to pay the taxes. And she said, you know, I still haven't gotten a tax bill. I've called and asked them to send it, whatever. So I contacted them to say how much is due. By the time they got back to me, they had actually put the land up for auction. It took 3 days for them to get back to me. So it turned out that they had changed the address on the tax bill. We didn't change the address, and they don't pretend that we had anything to do with it. They changed the address on the tax bill, so it didn't get to Estelle. It came back. They claimed that having had it come back 2 or 3 times, that they had tried to send it out again, and they didn't understand why it was now coming back. They changed the year, they changed the dates in the year by when things had to be paid. I'll get there. They changed the dates so that instead of it being March 1st like it had been, they moved it up to, I think, January 1st. They put a notice in the paper, but not the paper that Merry Christmas, who lived not far from the land, the one she reads regularly, but in a different paper, so she didn't see it, and they didn't post the land. So Mary had literally been there. Mary was checking every couple of weeks, regularly going down, making sure things were okay, whatever, and actually was on the land, I think, the day of the auction. But they hadn't posted it. She didn't know, so they didn't notify us that way. It turned out that what they had done was dropped Estelle's name off the bill, so it was just coming to the organization. It was still coming to this address, but without the apartment number. So having taken Estelle's name off the bill and the apartment number, and this is a big building, the bills kept getting sent back.
Hold it right